When you sit down and play a game of chess, there are certain things you don't really think about. You're probably playing with another person, so that means it's fundamentally about communication. Do you play to win, or is there perhaps another motivation? Maybe you just want to have fun, pass the time, or maybe you just want human connection. What about the pieces you're playing with? Do you ever consider what it might be like to be one? No, seriously, I know it sounds silly, but just imagine for a second. All of your movements, the movements of your allies and of your enemies, are controlled by some higher beings you can't even conceive of. Pieces are taken left and right, and you lose more and more of your friends, thanks to this cruel game you are all being manipulated to play by a force indistinguishable from fate. When the players are done with the game, they put away the pieces and the game board awaits another day, where the same pieces will be placed on the same surface to play the same game once again. Each time, the course of the game goes a little differently. Players aren't simply repeating the same moves every time they play after all. But in the end, the fate of the pieces remains, doomed to repeat the cycle of life and death, and capable of living on normally because of the nature of their being. When has a chess piece ever risen above its player? Players, pieces, the game board. The series we are talking about today is an exploration of these things among much more. That being the series of horror mystery visual novels and other media known as When They Cry. When They Cry as a title encompasses three main stories: Higurashi When They Cry, or When the Cicadas Cry, Umineko When They Cry, or When the Seagulls Cry, and Ciconia When They Cry, or When the Storks Cry. You may have already heard of any of these and may be surprised to find they're part of a larger series. It may begin to seem daunting, especially considering the former two are longer than the Bible respectively, and the third is a work in progress. But it's not so scary. Each of them can be read standalone, and each provides a complete narrative with a satisfying closure. I do believe there is value in reading them in their chronological order, as they follow a thematic train of thought and build upon the themes of the entries that came prior. Each successive entry recontextualizes what came before, both in a thematic sense and in a lore sense, though the bits of lore we receive are very scattered and up to interpretation. For example, there is debate on whether or not they even take place in the same universe. There are characters who make an appearance in some form or another in several entries, leading to even more theories. But reading them in order isn't strictly necessary, as they each have their own flavors and appeals, and there may be equal value to starting with the one you find yourself most interested in. Once you do, if you find yourself having enjoyed it, I would highly recommend going back and experiencing the others, as if you enjoy any of these in style or themes, you are absolutely bound to enjoy the rest. On top of that, having each of them enriches the understanding of the rest, and in no time, you will have so much to think about. That's enough talk about order, since we've barely established what we're even talking about. So what do these stories have in common, besides the chess analogy, whatever it means? I mentioned When They Cry is a horror mystery series. Indeed, each entry can be described as such to some extent, though holding any of them down to a particular genre description will only spell misunderstanding. They are completely different stories after all, and each of them, in a way, fundamentally about storytelling itself. The genres, even within a particular entry, are taken as a mere suggestion when it means greater meaning can be found in subversion. Subversion is the operating word when it comes to describing the franchise's relation to genre. Take Higurashi, for example, which initially presents itself as a slice-of-life comedy VN with hints of romance, but slowly descends into psychological horror and suspense. If that sounds familiar, it's because there are a lot of stories that since took inspiration from Higurashi, yet many of its descendants stop there, while Higurashi takes it another step further and begins to deconstruct the horror and create a stunning and effective synthesis. Meanwhile, Umineko can be seen as a deconstruction of Golden Age detective fiction, throwing the reader into the deep end of murder mystery obscured by layers of contradicting fantasy, teaching them the fundamentals, and then challenging their origin fundamentally. They each also have a different philosophy philosophy when it comes to their mystery and how they interact with the audience. Higurashi weaves a conspiracy with supernatural elements and murder mystery, and asks you to figure out how much of these is applicable, if at all. Engaging with it as a mystery you can solve is encouraged, but not required, as it's written to be appealing even if you take everything at face value. Umineko is in many ways the opposite. It's very focused on the murder mystery logic puzzle angle, and demands that you invest in it with all the brain cells you can muster. Though you could theoretically look past it and still enjoy it for what it is, you will be punished for not seeing it as a game, particularly in the visual novel. At the same time, because of this, it can be immensely rewarding if you do. Great care is taken such that it's fair and logical, and doesn't throw in so many confounding variables like Higurashi. As you go, you will learn exactly how you are meant to reason out the solutions. Ciconia throws you completely into the deep end of conspiracy. It attacks you from all angles and taunts you with easy solutions that just don't add up. Even the conditions and the goal of the mystery are, well, a mystery. You're lost in a complicated world where you're just a piece used by powers you don't know in a game with rules you don't understand. As previously mentioned, at the time of this video, Ciconia remains unfinished with only one part released, but already the theories people have about it resemble insane conspiracy ramblings. On the subject of its mystery, author Yukishi07 has stated, "You can simply enjoy the story, or you can think about it and speculate as you like. Ciconia is a game that doesn't force you to solve it." So far, I've been purposefully vague as to attempt to describe the appeal without giving too many plot details, as to some people, anything you say is a spoiler. If what I've said so far piques your interest, feel free to close the video now and go look into the series. In fact, feel free to do that at any point in this video if I've convinced you, so you can go in as blind as possible. Whenever you're going to, though, go ahead and use the chapter select feature or skip to the timecode on screen for a chat about the versions of each story that are available and which one is right for you. But now let's begin to talk more specifically about each entry and why you should read them. Higurashi When They Cry introduces us to Keiji Maebara, a boy from Tokyo who has recently moved into a quiet village in the mountains called Hinamizawa. It lacks the luxuries he had come to take for granted, but it allows him to escape the oppressive atmosphere of competitive education for a much more laid-back classroom with children of all ages. There he made friends with the most insane girls he'd ever met. Tomboy and game master Mion, shy master of cuteness Vina, haughty and rambunctious trap master Satoko, and deceptively intelligent master of deception Nika, who collectively form a club where they play games and attempt to win by any means necessary, the loser receiving a harsh and embarrassing punishment. Struggling to find a niche for his own abilities, Keiji often ends up losing and suffering the consequences. Yet as much as he protests, he doesn't mind too much. He was never this close to anyone back in his own school, so he very quickly became attached to this newfound friend group, and they accepted him with welcome arms, as long as he could try and keep up. Things began to take a turn when Keiji learns about the history and customs of Hinamizawa, including a dark past with mutterings of cannibalism and torture, and a recent string of unusual deaths that occur every year on the night of the village's cotton drifting festival, which are said to be a curse of the village's patron god, Oyashiro-sama. Tensions escalate as he learns of his new friend's connections to this curse and what they are hiding from him. The ideal world he found himself in for this brief moment in his life begins to melt away around him, and despite his best attempts to hold it together and to believe in his friends, the world as he sees it quickly approaches a point of no return, and tragedy becomes imminent. More than the rest, Higurashi is deeply psychological, in not just themes but also its prose and storytelling. It isn't until much later in the series that it begins to show you other perspectives. words, and every moment puts you right in the head of the POV. You are along for the ride with them, on a track laid with every scattered, uncomfortable thought. Sometimes you feel completely one with the protagonist, and feel overwhelmingly distraught or empowered along with them. Sometimes you feel like you're strapped to a train barreling towards a cliff, and you desperately want to yell at them through your screen. Particularly the visual novel in this regard is an experience that's hard to match. One of the things that separates it from its imitators is that the happy moments we share with the club feel completely genuine. It doesn't feel like it's stalling or trying to lure you into a false sense of security. It's genuinely entertaining as a slice-of-life character comedy, and it gets you to really care for the characters and to become invested in the world Keiichi wants to protect. If you're someone who wants to skip past stuff like this and get to the good part, then you won't get the full experience out of this. But if you don't mind a slower pace or the genre, it makes everything else that much more compelling. I am a person who tends to look at fiction analytically, or from a writing perspective. I like to deconstruct the media I'm consuming as I'm consuming it. It's just how I enjoy creative content, pretty much has always been. But even to me, Higurashi is a story rich with complex emotions that grab me even when I return today, after so many years and reading it so many times. Even seeing certain pages of the manga is enough to almost have me in tears. Higurashi explores themes of empathy, forgiveness, superstition, friendship, mental health and the way it's treated by society, and the strength it takes to be saved. If any of this sounds remotely appealing, I highly recommend you give it a shot. Umineko When They Cry takes place on the prolific Ushinomiya family's private island of Rokenjima, following 18-year-old Battler Ushinomiya who returns to the family conference for the first time since leaving the family 6 years ago. With the aged family head Kinzo on death's door, an air of tension envelops the cheerful gathering, as the subject of inheritance weighs on the adults' minds, made even more complicated by the family legend of a hidden mountain of gold bestowed by a witch. In the dead of night it begins. A series of gruesome ritual murders which seem increasingly impossible to have been carried out by human hands. The evening prior, they had received a mysterious letter by an individual who calls herself Beatrice the Golden. She bears the name of the Witch of Kinzo's increasingly mad obsession, and claims that due to a contract she formed with him, she will reclaim the gold and interest in the form of everything the family has. But there's a special clause. If anyone, family or not, can solve the riddle of the epitaph placed in the manor by Kinzo and discover the gold themselves, Beatrice will abandon the right to all she is owed. As more and more lives are claimed, more and more of the survivors can't help but succumb to belief in the witch. Our protagonist, however, has a different idea. Battler denies the possibility of magic with full conviction. He believes that every murder has a human solution if they can just reason it out and spin the chessboard around to look at it from the culprit's perspective. One would be forgiven to think it would become difficult to maintain this view once Beatrice herself appears before him in purgatory and shows him magic, but it's just the beginning. Thus begins the endless game between the witch and the man who denies her. Magic versus logic, fantasy versus mystery. In a metatextual world separate from that of the game board, Beatrice moves her pieces to construct a truth where she killed the family with her magic, while Battler moves his own to dispel the illusion of the witch. And yet, as it goes on, Battler is forced to confront whether he even understands the true purpose of their game. Are games really only meant to win? I won't summarize anymore, and if you ask half of Umineko's fans, I have already said too much. But the truth is, I've hardly even scratched the surface of what Umineko really is and its appeal. It's one of those things that you really have to experience for yourself. Umineko is a lot of things. It's a murder mystery, a character drama, a shonen battle series where the power system is logic, a romance, a critique of capitalism and patriarchy, a suspense, a rumination variation on the concept of fiction and storytelling. It's a genre-defying mass that coagulates into a cohesive message about the nature of truth and love, represented completely in the game's core aphorism: without love, it cannot be seen. Higurashi is the more well-known of the two, and the one that happened to resonate with me more. But the general reception to Umineko by those that read it is nigh unanimous, that it's one of the greatest pieces of fiction, one that is so good it fundamentally alters how you experience media from the point of completing it onwards. Ciconia When They Cry is the relative newcomer to the franchise, so far featuring only one part of an intended 4. So what I say about it will be colored by that fact, but that doesn't mean I think you shouldn't give it a chance now if you feel persuaded. The content that's already there is more than enough to sink your teeth into and brain rot over. In a strong departure from the previous 2 entries, Ciconia takes us into the far future of A3W, the world after World War III. Our focus is on the Gauntlet Knights, which are basically like military sci-fi magical girls, and each country only has a handful of them due to the low percentage of children with the aptitude to be one. And yes, they are all children. Due to the era of peace they enjoy and the technology making the world more interconnected than ever, they maintain a long-distance friendship and quickly become a tight-knit group thanks to the friendly competition and simulations. But under every era of peace lies forces that seek to gain by bringing it to an end. Our protagonist Mio Mitake forms an order among his peers and brings them together under the shared interest of preventing the outbreak of World War IV. But as the tragedies pile up and more of his friends have to choose between the order, their country, and their ideals, he feels his naive hope stretched thin. An array of shady powers, an ignorant public falling to propaganda, and the ever-increasing list of apocalypses on the horizon. Underlying it all is the inescapable truth. Mio and his friends will kill each other. Is a world this cruel even worth saving? What if humanity needs a reset, and in truth many need to die? What if you could just forget it all and live in a fabricated digital world forever? Ciconia is a story that hits so close to home in our current climate to the point of being existentially horrifying. Part of the reason why Phase 2 has been delayed for so long is that too many of its predictions instantly came true. But even beyond that, it strikes at the core of the anxiety we all face as our future becomes uncertain at best. Higurashi and Umineko both take place in the 1980s, while Ciconia takes place in the distant future. Yet Ciconia captures the experience of growing up in our modern age to a frightening degree. It understands the true bonds we are able to form with people around the world we meet on the internet, and the despair we feel watching our long-distance friends suffer from the rapid decline in the conditions where they live and how it is to live there. It arrives at the worst-case scenario, one where you are drafted to fight and kill the friends who helped you make it through the day. I love each entry, but in terms of horror, Ciconia shakes me to the core where the others weren't able to. On a less bleak note, Ciconia is easily one of the most openly progressive pieces of otaku media I have ever seen. There's a moment where the characters literally gather around to talk about the nature of gender and how it's different from sex. I'm dead serious. It handles cultural issues with tact and love, and has an insanely diverse cast of different characters from different backgrounds. If that interests you, I definitely say check it out. I feel a lot of complicated things towards Ciconia, but all of them point to it being no less than a masterpiece. Surely it will all be sorted out by its conclusion, and I'll be able to share equal or more love for it that I have for the other entries. What I'm saying in essence is, there is boundless potential for peak. Now let's talk about the mediums through which the series can be experienced. Of course, all 3 entries are originally published as visual novels by 07th Expansion, and you can't really go wrong by choosing to go with them. Any other version is going to have cut content. All of them are available on Steam. Ciconia is presently only available in this format, as it's still ongoing. Both Higurashi and Umineko have a manga adaptation. Are they worthwhile substitutes? Opinions vary, but in my opinion, for the most part, yes. The Higurashi manga does have a rocky start, as the first 2 arcs feel somewhat like an advertisement for the VN, but after that, it's genuinely a compelling way to view the story, with arguably better pacing than the original. The Umineko manga is a very solid experience throughout, with the main drawback being that you don't get to listen to one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. It should be noted that Umineko's final 2 arcs, or episodes as they are called in that series, have significant differences between the visual novel and manga, yet they are both written by the same author. Whether one or the other is superior is an ever-present debate in the community, and you can find an equal number of stalwarts for either side. Either way, whatever you choose, I recommend eventually seeing to it that you read both versions of these 2 episodes. You may have heard rumors of anime adaptations. Well, yes, there are. Do I recommend them? No, not for a first experience. Higurashi has 2 anime, a 2006 adaptation by Studio Dean, and a second anime in 2020 by Studio Passione. The 2006 adaptation suffers from taking the first 6 of 8 arcs, each of which can go up to 10 hours or more in the visual novel, into 26 episodes. Do you see the problem? On top of having a budget of 2 dimes and a piece of gum, it simply isn't capable of capturing the heart of the original, which is the story that requires time to breathe. The Cliff Note story beats are there, it doesn't do something crazy and veer into a completely anime-specific direction, but it butchers so much and handles the characters and themes rather poorly. How about the 2020 anime? Well, it's a sequel to the visual novel. Yeah, you heard me. It's not a sequel to the anime, as whenever it revisits the events of the original, it almost always reflects the version present in the visual novel. However, it is a bit strange in how it was handled, as the public was deceived as to its true nature when it was originally marketed as a remake. The anime itself does have newcomers in mind, and you definitely can watch it and enjoy it without prior context, but if you're already watching this video and didn't just stumble upon the anime, I'd like to direct you away from it, as it contains major spoilers for the original story. It's a very complicated subject overall, and one I'll discuss another time, but for now that's all you need to know. Okay, so what about the Umineko anime by Dean? Is it any better? No. In fact, if you ask most people, it's worse. On top of having many of the same issues present in Higurashi's Dean adaptation, it outright makes the mystery unsolvable by cutting corners, and just straight up isn't finished. This second half was never made. Yeah. Unlike Higurashi though, I actually find it to be an enjoyable watch once you finish the VNR manga. So in summary, read the visual novels for the full experience, read the manga if you don't mind a little bit of cut content and or want a version with a more brisk pace, and steer clear from the anime until you've finished. So that's it, right? Well, we're not exactly done yet because there are actually a few different ways to experience the visual novels you might hear about. Don't worry, all 3 entries are listed on Steam for your enjoyment, with the first chapter of Higurashi even being free. But the version seen on that platform feels to many people incomplete compared to what you could be getting. The Steam versions offer the original artwork and backgrounds, along with remake art in the NVL format, meaning the text is displayed on screen like a novel. The OG sprites are peak, and if you say otherwise, you're wrong. Sorry, I don't make the rules. But they're an acquired taste for some, and the remake art isn't generally well liked. Modern gamers also tend to prefer the ADV format, where text is displayed at the bottom of the screen in a text box, as opposed to NVL. Maybe you want backgrounds that were drawn instead of taken from photos, and maybe you want to experience the stellar voice acting.
よくもこの後ろ宮バトラーを敵に回しやがった。何が何でも 様を否定してやるぞ。どんな不可解だろうと全部人間で説明してやる。てめえをこの世から細胞のひとかけらまで残さず消し去ってやる。
If any of these alternatives sound appealing to you, then it might be worth it to check out the modding options. For Higurashi, you can easily find and download the 07th mod, trust me, it's very easy, and receive everything included in the console version of the game exclusive to Japan. You can even pick and choose which aspects you want to carry over. This option is also available for Umineko, but there's also Umineko Project, which is more like a straight-up port of the console game, including mouth flaps. If you're into that, I guess. It's a lot more of a pain in the ass to set up though, and you're probably going to have to ask someone to help you. Or maybe I'm just incompetent. Whatever. As a final note on the subject of adaptations, I'd simply like to remind you that watching/listening to Let's Plays is a valid way to experience the visual novels if you can't find the time to sit in front of your computer screen, except for Ciconia because there is currently an embargo on content up to a point. Is it ideal? No, it's probably better and more atmospheric to be alone with your own thoughts and conclusions, but I just want to remind you that it's another option for people who are into that. So, I don't really have a good transition in mind, but now I'm going to talk about some closing thoughts regarding the appeal and what the series means to me. You may have noticed, but tragedy is a common theme. But I almost hesitate to say that it's a genre that describes when they cry. In a thematic sense, tragedies are cautionary tales, critiques of what is, will be, or could be. For example, Death of a Salesman is arguably the most well-known modern example of a tragedy, and it's a criticism of the state of capitalism and the ideal American dream. It's easy to see why this thematic approach is so common. Tragedies, by definition, have a bad ending. But there's something about Ryukishi's writing that I've taken to heart for my own. It's that he never just criticizes. He isn't content to just paint the world as bleak, to leave the audience in despair and at a loss of how to move forward. Higurashi and Umineko, and potentially Ciconia, have a certain structure where the first half is deemed the question arcs, and the latter half the answer arcs. Most obviously, this describes the approach to the mystery. The first half sets up all the questions, and the second half guides you to the answers. But it applies in a thematic sense as well. The question arcs act similarly to a traditional tragedy like I just described, but the answer arcs do something different. They provide a solution. Life is complicated and unfair, but we can't just give in and lose faith in a better world. Whether it's about preventing tragedies before they can occur, or how to carry forward with tragedy in your past, When They Cry posits philosophies that can prove meaningful. Not everyone ends up agreeing with its conclusions. After all, there are many ways to live. But to those who need it, its messages can resonate strongly. I know because it happened to me. When They Cry changed my life. When They Cry is a horror mystery series. It's known for its dark content, for the murder, for the endless cycles of death. But in truth, it's an epic of hope and unconditional empathy. It's a masterpiece that impacts the lives of so many people. Seriously, my experience isn't unique in that regard, it's common. It's a work of fiction that puts forward perspectives that seem obvious in hindsight, but that we're too blinded by our complicated lives to consider, and conveys them in a way that cuts through our jaded exteriors. This is why I love When They Cry. This is why you should read When They Cry. Thank you so much for watching. I go by Tasty Nachos, and you go by.